Hello, everyone. I'm Sinclair Erdwin, Deputy Director of AIA DC. Thank you for joining us today for AIA DC and DC NOMA Town Hall on Stopping Asian Hate. Before we get started, I have a couple of housekeeping items. First, a legal disclaimer. By participating in this webinar, you are granting your permission to be recorded and for the recording of you to be distributed as AIA DC and the Washington Architectural Foundation may choose. Throughout the presentation, please feel free to add your questions to the Q&A box. The panel will answer as many of those as they can following the presentation. And with that, I'll turn it over to Christopher and Reggie to get us started.
Thanks so much, Sinclair. And so simply just, we'll start off with this joint statement from AIA DC. And if you don't mind going back, please, thank you. And the DC NOMA boards, which is hate never belongs in our communities. And so we condemn racism. And you know what, Christopher, I'm gonna say this one more time for those who may have the slower Wi-Fi in the back. We condemn racism. And so it looks like we lost Christopher a little bit, but we'll catch him back in a second. But to move forward with the statement, recently there were so many senseless tragedies in our country. An elderly Asian woman was attacked in San Francisco, and many innocent Asian women lost their lives in Atlanta. We condemn these assaults and call on all architects in DC area to support our Asian community. These events are sending a clear message that the Asian community is under attack. We must act together to defend our collective community. We love our Asian Americans and Pacific Islander communities. They are an indivisible part of Washington, DC. The AAPI community, just like other communities, are emerged with diverse cultures, businesses, races, and lives. Chinatown between 5th and 8th Streets Northwest is a great example with its unique streetscape, featured signage, beautiful building facades with active street events that are important parts of city life. And so if one of us is hurting, we're all in pain. And so we're gathered here today really to bring to light and give a voice to this community as AIA DC and DC NOMA boards. I'm gonna give a quick minute to see if we can get Christopher back online, and we'll keep pushing forward. But I just really want to provide some context and spirit of this town hall. We have our beautiful colleagues who represent many different backgrounds that are going to really bear their heart and their soul and their truth to really help us move in this moment, because it's not without our understanding of what they have to go through that we can move forward. And so all I ask is that we listen attentively and cautiously to understand what's going on in there, and listen with an open heart so that our hearts can heal with theirs and help push forward for mankind. And last but not least, just come in with an open mind to know that we are pushing for solutions in the architectural field as well as in society, and every person can contribute. Every person can move forward and can help us eradicate this hatred and this systemic racism. And so with us, we also have our board member, Giselle Santos Rivera. And I'd like to bring her on and really just talk about, as she is the Director of Justice, Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion. She's a AIA DC board member, and then also she's a trusted advisor of DC NOMA, as well as the National NOMA board. So I believe she has some words of wisdom for us as we are listening in on this town hall. Giselle?
Thank you very much, Reggie. Thank you for setting the tone and the expectation for today. I don't know if I have a lot of words of wisdom, but I'm very grateful to be here in this space and provide this opportunity for education, for all of us to sort of educate ourselves in what it means to be supportive, and also good listeners to our Asian American and Pacific Islander community in this time, where we are all experiencing these sort of senseless acts. And thank you, Reggie, again, for condemning racism, because that is part of the conversation here today. And as I've tried to navigate this year and share and amplify the voices of people that are not always at the table, I think it's really critical to have these spaces where we listen and create more self-awareness in ourselves of what it is to be a good ally and an accomplice for others in this space. And I'll try to keep it short, since I know Christopher is here and his Wi-Fi is a little choppy. So I can regroup a little bit later, but I encourage everybody to be mindful of who you are in the space, to be a good listener, to be an empathetic ear, and also take away what you're hearing today as an opportunity for you to grow and listen and be mindful of building a more inclusive community through this lens of justice, equity, diversity, and inclusion. And that at the end of this webinar, of this town hall, we will also provide more resources, because it is very important for all of us to educate ourselves constantly in what it means to be an ally in the space. And I guess we lost Christopher again. I apologize. I hope he has the time to listen. I know he really had a lot of words to say of why this was important. So I'll sort of reiterate that this is an opportunity to create a platform for everybody to have a voice and to be clear and share what it is that they feel in this space, and why it's important to be an ally for everybody. As Reggie said, and our statement says, if one of us is hurting, we are all in pain. So thank you again, our wonderful panelists, for sharing your voice, for being vulnerable and visible. It is so important to uplift and be representatives of your space. And I'll clarify that the Asian American and Pacific Islander community is not monolithic. So I'm grateful that we have a white representation of our community in DC here today. So thank you, and Reggie, take it away.
Absolutely, thanks, Giselle. And so one thing I know Christopher had in his notes to really take on is, when we think about this moment and in time, this is not only just about the events that and the tragedies that have happened recently, but this is something that has been going on, and it's just now being daylit, similar to actually what we've seen last year. So it's unfortunate that we're here again, but we are here to learn together to push forward. But truth be told, these are symptoms. These are symptoms of something that is going on bigger in the world and bigger than the United States. Let's talk about it specifically. This is something of the systemic racism that we all are having to battle together. And so I do want to take that minute and moment to really set that expectation and set that context. And so really something that Giselle had mentioned is that, we are talking about a community that is not a monolith. And I think it's beautiful that we have a panel, and if we can go to the next slide, we have a panel that represents such. So I'd love to just start to begin to introduce the panelists, who our first one will be Brittany Suksin Dao. I'll let her correct me when she gets on. We have Tom Shin as well, Nishu Sinha, Claire, Dickey, and Lee Bren. They will all have their unique point, and I will turn it over to them so that you can hear their stories and hear from them some of the things that they've been experiencing. And so without further ado, Brittany, would you mind taking it over for us, please?
Hi, yeah, absolutely. So my name is Brittany Suksin Dao. You said it correctly. And I will say that, just to start off, that it's an incredible honor to be asked to share this platform with the rest of the panelists here. I am a technical designer at Gensler as of 3 weeks ago, but I've been working in the Washington, D.C. area for the past 4 years. And I am also currently getting my Master's of Education at Master's of Architecture, my education at Virginia Tech at the Alexandria Architecture Center. Prior to that, I did my undergraduate at Yale. But to open us off and share a little bit more about myself, I'm from Kansas, born and raised. My family and my parents are from Laos. So Laos is a small country in Southeast Asia, bordered by Thailand and Laos. And most of my family is all by Thailand and Vietnam, excuse me. Most of my family is all from Laos. They all came as refugees in the late 70s, early 80s, post-Vietnam War. Something I think a lot of people don't know about Laos is Laos, even though we were US allies during the Vietnam War, Laos is the most bombed country per capita in the world to date. And that played a significant impact on my story, on my family's story, and how we came to the United States. My dad fled the country when he was 13 years old by himself, swam across the Mekong River, did time in refugee camp, and eventually made it here. And my mom came with her family eventually when she was about 6 years old. So I was lucky to grow up in Kansas with a really rich community, actually, extensive family, deeply rooted in our Lao culture. But outside my family is where I was in Kansas, and I was one of very few Asians amongst a predominantly white community. And that has always played an impact in my formation of my identity. So, I mean, from my first memory of being aware of my identity was when I was 8 years old and I was on the playground. And kids told me I couldn't play with them because I was Chinese, and explicitly told me I was not allowed to play with them. From there on through high school, being called out specifically as my nickname amongst a group of predominantly white friends as their cute Asian friend, and on through college, all the way on through some as recently as last year, getting yelled at in the street and saying that I'm the reason people are dying due to this virus. So that is a bit of my background and where I'm coming from. And something I think I just want to share is that although each of these moments may seem small, it's like a death by 1,000 cuts, and it builds up and it creates a sort of way of forming your identity, whether in proximity to whiteness and how you appear, whether you're always showing up or feeling othered, or simply not being seen for your full identity. And if I can close off my bio with just one quote that has helped me see where my place is, and as in light of all that's been happening and in this larger setting of being able to speak right now on this panel, it's a quote by Kathy Park Hong from her book published last year, Minor Feelings. And it reads, "The indignity of being Asian in this country has been underreported. We have been cowed by the lie that we have it good. We keep our heads down and work hard, believing that our diligence will reward us with our dignity, but our diligence will only make us disappear. By not speaking up, we perpetuate the myth that our shame was caused by our repressive culture and the country we fled, whereas America has given us nothing but opportunity. The lie that Asians have it good is so insidious that even now, as I write, I am shadowed by doubt that I didn't have it bad compared to others. But racial trauma is not a competitive sport." And that is where I will leave it and how I am currently feeling, but I'll pass it on. Thank you.
Thanks, Brittany. Hi, everyone. This is Christopher joining in late from internet problems. It's great to be part of this conversation, and I just want to say how grateful I am that everybody's gathered together virtually here today. So thank you very much, Brittany, for those thoughts. Let's ask Tom Shen from Gensler to introduce himself and share his story.
Great. Thank you, Christopher. I'm AAPI. The reason I can say that is I've done my DNA test. I think as most of us Asians can say that it's not one country. Asia is pretty darn big, and I kind of know my current mix now. But I'm mostly Chinese. My parents are born and raised in China, and I was was a generation that was born and raised in Taiwan. And then I came to US when I was a teenager. Taiwan was not an English-speaking country, so it was somewhat difficult, for me. I tried to adapt here in a new country during high school time, but then overall things got a lot better as my English got better, and I got to know this country better, and education, all this stuff. I grew up in Fairfax County, and I went to Virginia Tech, so I'm quite of a local guy. After, similar to Brittany, from Virginia Tech, I started working at Gensler as a student intern. That was about 28 years ago. And over my 28 years of career, Gensler really took off, and my career has also risen. Also from the intern, now I'm a principal in our office, and I'm also one of the regional executives. So I'm quite happy. I think I'm one of the more successful immigrant stories that things worked out for me. So from there, I want to talk about the AAPI. Last year was a hard year for all of us in this country. And from our firm, we stood up a DEI committee to focus on these issues, to have a dialogue, a platform for us to have this type of dialogue, to get all everyone's thoughts and understanding out there. I saw a lot of our Black colleagues did a lot of these leadership roles, really get people united. So over the past few months, for the AAPI community in just within our firm's Southeast region, we have pulled a group together. There are about 60 of us. We're having very similar conversation at this panel right here. I'm so very happy and proud of this type of conversation. I think as all the AAPI community is talk to, we are experiencing similar stuff. From ourselves, how should we conduct ourselves to our children and to our parents, and also professionally, how can we help to live at this profession? And so that's what I'm working on. Very happy to be included today. Thank you.
Thanks, Tom. Okay, let's go on to Nishu, who is also an important part of the AIDC committee leadership.
Hi, everyone. I am Nishu Sinha, and I'm glad to be here with this group today. I'm a co-chair of AIDC Equity Committee by WIELD and associate and project architect at HOK. I was born and raised in different parts of India. And when I was young, I have to share this dream that I always wanted to become an aeronautical engineer. And I went ahead and got my physics degree. Because in India, it's like, if you're not successful, if you're not an engineer or a doctor, and now probably an IT professional. But I was very creative at the heart, and my uncle, who is a civil engineer, he persuaded me to get into architecture, and that journey probably never stopped. I got my undergrad in architecture from Mumbai University. And after that, I was ready to take this challenge, both culturally and financially, to come to US. And I couldn't have done that without my parents' support. So I'm very grateful for that. And in 2005, when I came to US to SUNY Buffalo, I have to admit that the university culture for international students was very welcoming. And there was a very great support system from Indian student community over there, which pulled me for 2 years, and I was able to complete my master's. And I came to DC in 2007, and I joined HOK. It's a dream come true for a fresh graduate to join. And I was lucky to be here. And I have to share one story that when I went to, I think in 2011, when I went to NOMA conference in Atlanta with my other fellow HOKers, I didn't see enough representation from Asian community, and probably I was the only Indian there. I know it has changed, it is changing now, but it has taken so much time to get there. And like when I look 10 years, 14 years, fast forward, we have much more better platform within the firm, outside for the support, but it wasn't there, I would say then, and you are left alone for this challenge, to struggle with this challenge. And I have to share one incident, a personal incident, which happened to my daughter when she was 4 years old in pre-K4 in 2019, pre-COVID. She was called by name, and when she didn't even understand what being bullied means. So, and she refused to play with the, the parents organized the soccer group, weekend soccer group. She was refusing to play, and I didn't understand what's going on. And eventually she told me, but, and I thought that is very innocent, kids are innocent, and I didn't pay too much attention. But it was happening again and again, and I had to intervene. And I think it's just discouraging to hear that, and I'm just it's disturbing as well. Like, what will happen when they go back to school after this? It opens up, and but I have to say that it's just a projection of who we are, like, because we are different, and heart of this is like maybe invisibility, and but it is changing definitely. It has taken time. This reminds me of my favorite quote by Mahatma Gandhi: "You be the change you want to see in the world," and we can take the little steps together to be able to be the conduit of change and use the platform as an architect. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Nishu. Those are very good words to remember. Let us now introduce Claire Dickey, a senior associate at Perkins Eastman, and invite her to share with us her thoughts.
Thanks, Christopher. As you can see, I'm a senior associate at Perkins Eastman, DC. I also am an adjunct professor at the University of the District of Columbia. And so this has been an interesting experience this year teaching remotely. But I just wanted to mention that really quickly. And, in kind of preparing for this panel, I really had to stop and think about my life and kind of my Asian-ness in a way that I haven't necessarily had to do before. And so I really appreciate being asked to participate. And I just wanted to say that really quickly because I think that level of introspection has been really valuable for me. To give you a little bit of information about my background, my mother is Korean. My father is Caucasian. My parents met in Seoul when my father was stationed there in the Army in the 70s, and I was born at Fort Bragg in North Carolina. And so I've lived in the United States my whole life. And first and foremost, I think of myself as American. But I've always been really intensely aware that that's not how other people see me, because inevitably, one of the first questions that I was always asked when I was growing up is, where are you from? And when I would say I'm American, they would say, no, where are you from? Because you look different or you don't have an accent. And then when I would say, oh, well, my mom's Korean, I'm half Asian, then people would kind of they would laugh and they'd be like, oh, I knew it. I knew there was something different about you. Your eyes are Asian. But the irony of that for me was always that my mom had told me that she had to leave Korea when she was pregnant because as a big-eyed half-white baby, I would never have been accepted in Korean culture. And so she had to come to America. And so also, I didn't grow up speaking the language. I didn't eat Korean food much. I didn't celebrate any of the traditional Korean holidays. So, I mean, I've always kind of felt like I don't really belong to either race. Like, I'm not Korean, but I'm also not white or Caucasian. And so I kind of live in this in-between place. Also, I grew up in a military family. My stepdad was in the Navy, and so we moved around a lot. And so by the time I went to college, I had gone to 13 or 14 different schools. And so I think that like I just really got comfortable kind of being alone, and I was lonely. And so like, I don't know, I guess I never really focused on kind of the racial uniqueness all that much because I was just like, I was always alone. So I did experience some racism and bullying growing up. When I was in elementary school, we lived in Fort Worth, Texas, and I very distinctly remember kids who would like pull the corner of their eyes back and like, you know, do that sing-songy, like fake Chinese kind of voice at you, and, you know, would call me Chinese as though that's like the only type of Asian that exists. And so by the time we moved out of Texas, that's the only place that I remember I was like really glad to leave when we left. So, you know, by the time I got to high school, we were living in Virginia Beach, and there's actually a really large Filipino population there. And so most of the time people would just assume that I was Filipino. So I didn't really experience a whole lot of racism through most of my like later childhood because there were a lot of other Asians. But also it was funny because, you know, there's a lot of racism within the Asian community as well. And so because I'm relatively light skinned and I also have big eyes, like I was like a good Asian. So, you know, I would say probably for most of my life, I've really just kind of let myself take the compliments at like face value, and I haven't really thought about it that hard. And in some regards, would just kind of chuckle a little bit and shake my head because people are ignorant, and you know, but I didn't really feel like people were saying things from a mean place, and so I just didn't dwell on it too much. And honestly, I never really thought that things could be different. Like it never even occurred to me. And so I think that's part of what has made these kind of recent Asian violence instances feel more shocking. It's just that like in my limited experience, I've just kind of accepted that people's ignorance was mostly harmless without thinking ever that it could transition to this like really hateful and violent place where people are like literally attacked on the street. And so because I'm half Korean, I think maybe I've allowed myself to disassociate a little bit and feel removed from some of the worst of the racism. But I think that this has been really eye-opening for me, and just thinking about today, because it's really showed me that like I have a responsibility to speak up. And that, you know, my voice is important to speaking to that richness and diversity of what I have to say. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Claire. There's clearly so many dimensions to the bias and the violence that we're aware of now. It's very moving to hear everybody's personal stories. Last but certainly not least, I want to introduce one of our directors of the AIA-DC, Lee Ren, who's going to share his thoughts.
Hi, everyone. First, I'm so thankful for you to join us today, and thank you so much for your time and attention. Yeah, my name is Lee. I am currently the Director-at-Large in the AIA-DC in the 2021 board. I'm also architect project in the Perkins Eastman. And besides that, I'm also serving as a faculty in the Virginia Tech, and as well as licensed advisor, and play a very active role in the NCAR and the ICC as the code committee members. So I'm very glad to get involved in so many organizations and also try to share my perspectives. So initially, I'm a Chinese. I come from mainland China. My hometown is called Sichuan province. And the most famous things you probably heard of, one is the spicy food, another one is the panda. I went to University of Minnesota in 2013 for graduate study. After that, I moved to Washington, DC in 2015, and then start to practice my knowledge here. The key words I would like to mention today is, it's also something I learned a lot from here, is education. Initially, I come here for architectural professional education. That's why I go to school. I learn a lot. I really appreciate my professors, my classmates, which tolerate my strong accent, which is still here today. But the best thing is for most of architects, we have two languages, one language called English, another language called drawings. So we still can communicate both English and drawing. I think that's the one way to encourage me to hold on today and get accepted by the people around me. After that, I moved to DC to practice, which introduced me another great education class is communities. Initially, when I was here, okay, I treat myself as outsiders, as many people, because first, I'm not born here, I'm not grow up here, I'm just working here. But with time flies, especially what happened so many things in 2020, which made me feel like first, I live here in the Virginia. I belong to this community. Community is something which my understanding, both architecturally and the lifestyle understanding is I live here, with those neighborhoods, right? Anything happened inside these communities, which I have duty to pay attention. If something goes wrong or someone get hurt, definitely we should show our support as one group. I think that is community. That's how bring to my attention when all those terrible things happened at the beginning of this year, regarding the API, also which encouraged me or drives me to draft a statement and to condemn, to support, and to call for people's attention to those things. That is kind of my stories today. Again, thank you so much for joining, and I really look forward to have more words, communication with you all. Thank you.
Thanks, Lee. We really appreciate your words and your thought about community, because it's very interesting, the strength of community and how it can propel and really move our topics together, and not just move from talking about it. But let's talk about this idea of the myth of the model minority. I feel like this starts to break itself or in multiple different ways, and I'm just wondering, what are your thoughts, and how has that perception, or how has that influenced what's around you? And I guess I'll start off with Nishu, if you don't mind.
Yeah, sure. I think the myth about Asian community, a model minority myth, is like we are educated, prosperous, and then the second part of it is we are hardworking and politically silent, I would say. And that is where we have to break in and amplify and acknowledge and probably denounce. And that is when we can drive out we cannot drive out racism with racism. So these are my thinking, like where you can step in to break this or dismantle this model minority myth.
If I can chime in, I think the model minority myth was perpetuated around the 60s, shortly after it's Japanese had been interned, and then there was the Vietnam War, and then we had this mass influx, the largest mass resettlement of or refugee movement from the Southeast Asia. And a lot of that model minority myth pushed after the civil rights movement, and it was a way in how I've read about this, a way of pitting other minority groups against one another. And I think that's the harmful nature of the model minority myth, is that, be more like Asian communities, Black communities need to be more like Asian communities. This is the model minority. They're hardworking, they're silent, they don't say anything, and they're just trying to get by. When in fact, there has been just as much harm done to the Asian community as well. And that myth was harmful. I think a lot of the way that I think about it is, I think a lot of adults, say my parents during that time, it was easier to believe in that model minority myth because it was a way of believing that you could succeed. It was a safety measure. It was a way of feeling like you could be safe in the community if you bought into that myth. And I think that's what we're seeing now. It's that no matter how hard you work or how silent you are, or you can still be attacked, you can still be called out, you could still be told hurtful things. Even today, even a few weeks ago, like I got yelled at in the street in DC and told to open my eyes. You know, it's one of those things that no matter like where I get to in life, and you know, I thought going to an Ivy League school and the higher education rates for Laotian Americans is 16% when the national average is 33. And so it's pretty low, and that disparity and that difference between the model minority groups, I think, or model minority groups, that's not right. These, what we assume are model minority groups, is so dramatic. That disparity of who is getting higher education, what that wealth gap is like between all the groups. And so that's part of like why that model minority myth is so harmful. And I think, yeah, I guess what I was trying to say was that I think I believed having gone to higher education would be this sort of status of like, I've earned my place in American society, and I've put in the work, and I am an American, and I belong in these spaces. And then even in those spaces, somewhere I should belong, I was also called out and asked why I was there. And there all these little moments in which like I'm reminded that I'm seen as I do not belong there, and that model minority myth doesn't protect the AAPI community. It in fact hurts us and pits us against other communities that are also marginalized.
I think very similar to the few of us on this panel now, we are different. As I'm doing similar type of a network conversation, I found people who have been here 3 generations. They're people that were just born here, like my children, they're born here. The ones that came here when they're infants, they don't really quite know the culture or language too well. Then people like me came here as teenagers, and obviously like Li Ren, he just shared as a grad student. Or like my parents, my dad came here when he was 47. So that's not the same. There's no like a model you can say the person will be like that. Depends on this person's experience in US. There's a wide range of us, and that's one of the things I think as you start having a conversation, you're going to learn about that. Yeah, that person is different because their family is different. You know, they've been here 2 generations, and I just came here last year. Of course, we're going to have very, very different perspective on what the country is about, how people communicate with you. Also, language is a big concern. Like when you first come to this country, if you do not speak the language, I can completely associate with what Li Ren just said. I'll communicate with my drawings because I can't do it. I'm not a lawyer. I can't argue with you like that. So it's not the same story with everyone.
Exactly. I really agree with what Tom said, that there's multiple ways to try, I think, distinguish people one by one. And language, he mentioned, is one of them, which I think modern minority is another strategy, trying to divide people group by group. Because when you say modern minority, then my question first reactions, then who is not or not modern minority, right? If there's one is modern, another one which is not that modern minority, who is that? I think this is one strategy which divide people into 2 groups or even more groups. And also the definition of the model minority. What is the model? And which I heard of multiple explanation and understanding for that. Something say, okay, think highly of education, something that follow the law. Some people might see working very hard, something that would be honest to a job, to everyone. I think all those things are good things, and which is the reason, part of the reason why we can stay together. We follow the law, right? We have the same belief about equity or justice, all these things. Those things, there's no need to pick up and see, oh, you are the person who follows the justice, you are a great person. No, that is not. It's just the common sense. Everyone, the reason why we can sit down together, that's why we believe it's something similar. But we still have a lot of things different. So what I'm trying to say is pay attention to those things similar. That's how we can sit together, eat dinner or work together, but also to respect to something different, which language, the cultural background, eating habitat, the family structure, all those things, which I think those differences also make this society interesting, right? Make those conversation interesting as well. So yeah, that's definitely something I would like to share. about modern minorities.
Yeah, thank you, Lee. I think that point is really important to all of us, both if we identify with marginalized communities, if you are yourself an immigrant or from a family who are recent immigrants. I think the discussion about having allies is critically important. Allies within your community and also from the dominant culture. And one of the things that I've learned over the last few weeks, my friends and colleagues and this preparing for this board, is how pervasive the discussion about invisibility is. And partially because of what you've just shared before this, about the myth of the model minority, but invisibility on both sides of the conversation, a reticence to maybe not be putting it on the surface, attracting more attention, and also a failure of the dominant culture to not be recognizing what's happening. Can I share some of your experiences, both as citizens, as people, as professionals in the architecture community? What does the change that you're seeing in the relationship of this topic of invisibility, what does it mean to you? Maybe could I call on Claire first, since we said invisibility, I noticed a little visibility of one of your helpers.
Yeah, over the year that we've been remote, my kids have all gotten really comfortable on camera. And so it is a regular occurrence. I have 3 elementary age kids in my house that, pop into my calls on the regular. So that was one. I wouldn't be surprised if, another one didn't show up at some point. But I mean, as far as invisibility is concerned, I would definitely, I would absolutely agree with that as, as something that we kind of deal with. And, I was kind of thinking about that, getting ready for today, and, who were my role models. And the kind of the reality is that, like, I don't know that I really had any, certainly not any Asian role models. I never expected to see them. It never even occurred to me that that could be a thing, and I'm in some regards, it's as kind of a double minority in the sense that there's, Asian people, but also women, and kind of coming at it from both of those perspectives. For me, it was almost, it was really rewarding to see women in positions of leadership at all. And, even for the almost 20 years that I've been practicing, there have not really been that many women in leadership positions, which is changing. But, as far as seeing, Asian women in leadership, that really hasn't been a thing. It's there. If you think about who some of those examples might be, the only name that really comes to mind immediately is Maya Lin. And, and that's kind of held up as like, oh, see, representation, you've got one, and so I'm really interested, and I'm really pleased that there is attention starting to be paid to this question, because I do believe that everybody deserves to be seen, and everybody deserves to, have somebody out there that they say, oh, that could be me. And so I'm really hopeful that we will see just a really big shift, as we, move into these next couple of years, so that, the next generation of Asian women architects that, come into the profession will feel like they have somebody to look up to.
Yeah, and I have to agree with Claire on this one, because I was seeing a lack of more senior mentors with diverse background when I joined the workforce. and I'm glad it is changing, because now you're seeing a lot of diversity in the young professionals joining architecture. Maybe a reverse mentoring can pull the young minority. Maybe that can be an approach to this, because the more diverse and inclusive our profession will be, we'll have a better solution as an architect, I think, other than visibility.
I think a complicated component about that too is location, like geographically and where you are in communities. And I think that's where, even though I'm relatively young to the practice compared to the panelists I'm among, I am still having a hard time finding and seeing like that level of leadership or role model. And you know, it is exciting to join a larger firm like Gensler, where there is a lot more focus on diversity, and there's an incredibly diverse firm. But that's not always what it was for me prior, and it wasn't what it was growing up with. And I think the other component about invisibility is also that, with tied in with the model minority myth, like how much like internalized racism that is built in, where you are seeking to be close to whiteness. And I know for myself personally, growing up in Kansas, like that is something I've had to work really hard to unsee and undo and unlearn in myself. And that's the other component about invisibility, is in ourselves as AAPI like people. We also have to make ourselves visible and take up that full identity. And also on the notion of our non-AAPI community members, like being able to see us in the nuanced light. And I think being seen more than our stereotypes, being seen as not just Asian, being seen as like, oh, this is part of your identity, and I want to acknowledge what's been happening to your community, and I want to acknowledge that that's not also all that you are defined by. And there's just so much complexity to that layer of invisibility that's like hidden underneath the model minority myth. And so on the component of internally, being able to dismantle some of that internalized racism and that need or perceived need that I needed to be closer to whiteness to succeed and be safe, like in my communities, professionally and like personally. And then also within, like on the exterior, being seen as more than just Asian, or being seen as more than just like whatever that myth is important to that invisibility narrative.
I have a more direct message. I'm calling all the senior people, all the senior architects, all these AAPI community. Stand up, help, be the mentor, be the coach. You cannot be the one that's invisible in this community. You have the position, do something.
Exactly, Tom. I totally agree with that. I just want to share some of my personal ideas and experience. Since I have been working 6 years right now, but I can become the board member of AIDC. I think one thing is I was trying to make the invisibility become visibility, and I do realize that. I think this is information I'm trying to share with all the AAPI and other community is. People or the whole country or everyone value your perspective. People value your words. People would like to share, to know what you're thinking. If you can bravely stand out and speak out your ideas, I understand that many people might be speaking English is not my first language. It's sometimes be shy to speak out. Sometimes you have to think about or even write down before you make a speech on that, which is okay, but be brave to take your first step, to attend those panels, to attend those tours, to make a network with other architects, designers. People will know you, will know your face. I remember my first time to lead an event in the AIA. It's a tour. I used to attend some others, but I feel like it's so hard to speak out because first, my reaction many a longer time to understand what that people is talking about, and then provide my feedback. But then I choose one project, it's called Woolwich Library in the DC, which I participate in that design. I am super familiar with this building. So I guiding the people to tour around in this building. Of course, I have so much things trying to speak out. So first, it's one way to invite people to take a tour in this building. Another way, it's also kind to, for myself to practice, to speak publicly, to speak to everyone, people here, and then step by step to overcome the English scaring or some other things which go to the center of the stage, like the Tom said, stand up, go to the center of the stage. You have chance to speak under the light.
That's really beautiful, and what it starts to lead to me is the idea of being the thought and idea of having the audacity to unapologetically yourself. I think once we release that and it frees our minds and it frees our ability to become that next version or next. But it's interesting how representation can set up an uncomfortable situation because it does put somebody else on the defense. And that's the part about not apologizing for who you are and not apologizing because it's unnecessary. Somebody needs to take their lens and work off of empathy to know who you are and figure out where you are coming from, because that is being in the spirit of loving each other's culture. So I think that's something that's extremely beautiful. But when we talk about loving each other's culture, I felt like there was a conversation about representation that in the industry, we have a habit of lumping Asian into one place. I'd love to hear your thoughts. And Giselle, I don't know if I said that as eloquently as I should have, but I know that is something that we feel passionate about when we look at the metrics, is that we lump this down. And how do we break down that silo and those thoughts? I guess I'll open that question up.
I will answer this one. Yeah, when we say Asian, I think first of all, Indians are kind of dismissed from this. So it's a broader spectrum of Asian, like we are considered South Asian, but there are other people in this Middle Eastern, lot of other communities which are included in the Asian community. So it's not only one community. So we have to just pay attention to that. And I think some of the things we can do as an architect, changing mindset with partnering with BIPOC firms and recognizing the value of the BIPOC professionals on a team, because developing skills in intercultural awareness, and that will develop that, because you are including them, you're giving them chance, or you're giving them representation.
Yeah, I mean, I think that really just the heart of the whole question is really just education and coming, with an open mind to really understanding what makes people unique, and that, the experiences that they've had in the background that they come from, that there is really a huge variety of factors, and being willing to hear people and listen to where they're coming from, and just really fully accepting that not all Asians are Chinese, or that Asia extends into South Asia, and that there are just a huge breadth of diversity there. At the heart of it, it really does come down to education and just a willingness on both parts of people to kind of share their knowledge and expertise, but also a willingness to listen and to learn. And as architects, I think we are learners, and so this should be something that we really embrace wholeheartedly and make sure that we are sharing and learning every day.
I think I spoke to it a little bit earlier, but just the part of it is what we're doing now, having a panel and talking about the diversity within the Asian American community, and that it is very distinct differences between all these different groups, and understanding the wealth gap and the education gap between the different ethnicities of Asian American groups is really substantial, and that nuance is really important to being able to address people and support certain groups and find the right ways to bring that diversity into a community. I think part of our role as architects is, fundamentally we're makers of space, we make space, and part of that is we have to make safe space. So in order to, part of it is, yes, we have to speak up and choose to take up that identity, but you can only do so after you have done the work for yourself to be able to trust that you can take up space, and also to be in a space that is going to be safe, because part of it is I have not felt safe to say certain things, to do certain things, and to behave in a certain way. So key part is creating a workplace, creating a community that, starting here, creating a panel and speaking about this, that fosters a safe space in which people feel comfortable that they can do more, take on more, take up space, and not feel like you can be invisible. So I think as much as we create physical spaces, part of that notion is creating a safe, emotional, psychological, mental space for people to be able to show up fully.
Yes, and from my side point, I also trying to deliver message is to all attendees and my friends, just don't feel like the race or my Chinese background is something forbidden subject. It's not. If you're curious about my background, yeah, you can just go ahead and friendly ask me, hey Lee, where's your parents come from, or where are you or your family originally come from? That's okay. I would be very happy to share my story, to share those knowledges about my country, about my family, about my hometown. I think it's a kind of two-way communications. But just please don't use those kind of prototypes or to put labels on me to say Chinese should be do this, right? Or Chinese should do that. And if you're Chinese, you should do that. It's not very true, and especially China is a big country. People from north and south, just that people just here, people from Texas and people from Minnesota are quite different as well. So I think it's every conversation about those. I wish it could be turned into the education opportunity, not kind of fight between each others. And the culture, our background, could also be a source for your education. So yeah, please be friendly and step closer to our community and talk with us. And then you'll find Lee is a pretty talking person and pretty positive person.
All right, let me try to drop in some deeper philosophy stuff here now. As a Chinese guy, okay, I'm going to use it. We have, for Chinese scholar, we have this kind of live your life 4 steps. 修身齐家治国平天下. That means number 1, take care of yourself. Number 2, family. Then 3, your country. After that, you can try to conquer the world. 4 steps. Where we are as architects on this call. Number 1, self, right? First step, understanding all the things we talk about. Number 2, family. The family in this, I'm interpreting as your firm. What is your firm doing about it? What's your position in your firm? What can you do to help the lead? Family. Number 3, country. We don't have a country here. Us right here, AIA, our industry. This is it. This is all of us try to pull that together. Then the last step, society. As we can get these together, we can help to influence the society. So 4 steps. Thank you.
And I would like to add to that this should not be just marginalized to these events and the panel discussion, but maybe brought into the mainstream of university curriculum or studio courses. Maybe it should be highlighted over there as well.
I'll share a little bit that also language is very important. I'm not sure if you touched on that already, but sometimes the systems that are currently in place are a little bit limiting. Like, for example, if you're a firm that is does government work, then you have to report on certain metrics. Let that not necessarily hinder the opportunity to have conversations that broaden the language of how we should speak about these kinds of issues, and that it is really important to educate ourselves in the limitations of the languages that are currently in place, and how those can create inequities, but that, as Tom mentioned, in the firm, we can still have those conversations if we're open to creating the space, to being challenged, and being open in really pushing the narrative. Let's not also be limited by the current constructs that we have in place, and push the envelope a little bit to be mindful that, yes, language is important. Myths are meant to be dispelled at times, and that not any culture, there's no culture that is truly monolithic, as we've sort of shared in the space. And it is our responsibility as leaders, as teammates, as classmates, as partners in this space, to reach out and ask the questions. And if we are not comfortable asking the questions, educate ourselves. And also, I know, and thank you, Lee, for sharing the vulnerability of saying, I'm open to having this conversation and I want you to reach out. Not everybody is comfortable doing that. And I've said it in other panels, it's not necessarily everybody's opportunity to share their grief or their trauma for free. So, and like Tom said, some of the leaders, it's an onus on us to be open and visible and share and challenge, but let's find the resources available to open up those conversations, because not everybody is willing or necessarily their responsibility to really share where they are and who they are and be representatives of a culture. That's not necessarily the right thing to do either. But these spaces are what is important, and people like who we have here, Nishu and Brittany and Claire and Tom and Reggie and Lee, they are comfortable sharing their narrative and they're comfortable sharing openly. So use them as resources whenever you can, and not necessarily pull other people in your firm. There's a power dynamic, right? There's a power dynamic in that space. So be comfortable doing that. But the people that are open and willing to do it, yeah, challenge everybody else. And like Brittany said, it's really important to create a psychologically safe space. So be mindful of the language that you're using. Retaliation is a thing that people are worried about all the time. So acknowledge that whatever you say also is received a certain way in the other end. And it is really important to create that transparency and that clarity in that language.
Absolutely. And as we start to wrap this up, and we can put this slide back on, that we've had in our statement is, what do we do next and what do we not do now? I think Giselle really gave us a great, strong understanding what we could do at the office, and at firm meetings. We had the idea of opening up conversations, but then on social media, sharing the news. But I think Brittany made up a great point that, it's a hate crime and it can be triggering. And so let's be cognizant of what we're putting out there and create that warning. And then last but not least, on the street, I know there's an interesting observation that we say, keep your eyes open and call 911 if you see someone being harassed. But I think there's an important caveat that we have to make sure that we take into account, is that, if you're the bystander, make sure that you get consent from the person being harassed, because you never know what else can be layered into that engagement and in that interaction. And so there is a resource that we've put on the screen from Howlback as far as a bystander resource. And so the one thing that I would like to just really close and add in from DC NOMA is that you can start to see a lot of parallels from this conversation and the conversation we had a year ago. I think understanding and love and really being a human and enjoying people's cultures and finding them and it seems such like a foreign thing. It seems like a hard thing right now, but I think it is something that we all should lean into as we go daily in our workplace. Speaking specifically because this is AIA and NOMA, but then also in society. I think this will help create a better environment and create a better world in the United States. But we must confront the systemic racism now with processes and moving forward. So we are still looking for support in ways that we can eradicate this behavior so that our children, it may not happen in our generation, but our children or our children's children can be unapologetically who they are. Christopher.
Yeah, Reggie, that's before you said the audacity of being yourself, and this challenge to all of us to make space to have this conversation, to demand space to be visible. I think that these are themes that we're talking about as a community, a broader community, a lot more than we were a year ago. And that is a great thing for all of us. One of the questions I think that we heard is, focusing in on the profession, on our industry as designers and architects, is that making space, the sort of the infrastructure of bringing people together, making people comfortable to share, the encouragement as an ally. We're seeing more and more of that at firms like the ones represented by the panelists today, HOK, Gensler, Perkins Eastman, SOM. These are large firms. So the question could be, well, what do we do with mid-sized firms or even small firms where there might not even be AAPI representation? Similar questions also obviously have been raised with the African American community in architecture because the representation is so much less. So in big firms where you don't have the larger communities assembled already, what tools could we recommend for people, colleagues and allies who recognize the importance of making that conversation broader? Does anyone have some suggestions that we could share with the rest of our architecture community who's participating today?
I would say that we have different committees in AIADC, like we have Equity Committee, AIADU Committee. So join those committees because they are the platforms for you to engage, get more visibility, get resources. So that is I think one step we can take to get involved with the AIDC committees with different diverse knowledges and the experiences we are bringing together.
Christopher, I have two things. Really, one thought. One, to me, it's about recruiting and promotion. Recruit, you can add just like pretty basic, but eventually you have to have people in a leadership position where others can aim for it. Otherwise, you'll be like, even if I join your firm, I do not see any AAPI folks in the leadership role. Now, why should I be part of your organization? So I think that's ultimately what needs to happen.
And if I can add, I've only worked at small firms prior to this. I think a key thing, regardless, is acknowledgement. So even if, say, you don't have any AAPI members of your firm or Black community members at your firm, like acknowledging what's going on within like the larger society is really important because it sets the tone of how you want your firm and your people to be considering the rest of your broader community. So even if there is not like any representation necessarily within your firm, like acknowledging it is important, because we also don't know everyone's full stories. Like perhaps like there is a family member or there are like friends, and we're all connected. And so I think regardless of whether your firm has like an AAPI community member, you should start with acknowledging it, acknowledging what's going on, and making a clear like statement about how you feel and making that known to the people within your community. And then on the other side, on a different note that's related, is that we talked about education, and I think education is a really component of it, and architecture education, I think, still has a long way to go around having these conversations, around shifting what architects were studying in school. Being in grad school now, I'm asking the questions like, where are the readings or the texts by women architects? Where are the readings and the texts and the examples from non-Western European architecture? Like, so where can we look for these other examples of what architecture is, other than what we've been predominantly taught in education? And so I think that is one barrier related to our field where we are professionally, is the education. Like, what examples are we being shown, or what are we being taught as architecture with a capital A? Like, what are we being taught, and is it diverse? Is it from many different perspectives? And I think we still have a long way to go in that regard, because it's a barrier. I think if you are stepping into architecture education as a BIPOC person and not seeing anything other than like a Western European examples as what architecture is, that can feel like a barrier, and can shift what you think is like the higher level of achievement that you should be striving for, what is, seen as like, what's the word I'm looking for? But the high achievement level essentially is what I'm trying to say.
No, and I think that's a great point, actually, because I mean, thinking back to my architecture education, I mean, I did, as part of my search for, what does it mean for me to be Korean or to be Asian, I went out and found there was, a kind of an Eastern architectural history class, and then I had taken some other similar classes that were focusing on non-Western information. But really, you shouldn't have to go out and like deliberately try to find that information. It really should be more integral to just the general education that you're receiving, and that kind of infers an equality and an importance to that content that should be really spoken and emphasized.
I agree, and unfortunately I dropped off for a minute, so I'm not sure if this was covered, but I know a lot of people think that because, for example, HKS is a large firm, then there's an opportunity to have somebody like me focus on justice, equity, diversity, inclusion all the time. I think because it's a large firm, the likelihood that the need for somebody to focus on these things is important. At a smaller firm, I think the opportunities should be spread around an office and a firm, and tools or committees can be created at a firm-wide level that supports the conversation. So using the guides for equitable practice as a premise for how to structure a program or the things to focus on, it could be very important. Something that we've done, and I know I've suggested and other people are doing, just grab the guides for equitable practice, pick a chapter, it's only 10 chapters, pick a chapter a week or a month, kind of distill it, break it apart throughout your firm or throughout a group of a cohort that is interested in distilling this topic, and figure out what that means for your firm. Bring that up to your board or to your leaders and ask questions about what that means for the organization to focus on these topics in a systemic and meaningful way. And other opportunities, using the JUST label, for example, as a starting point. Look through the documentation. Is that important? What does it measure? Why does it measure certain things? And what is the relevancy of these things to other things in the organization? And I know I think that was the question before, metrics. Not only do you want to talk about metrics, but what are the relevant metrics that are important for you and your firm to track? And that can vary significantly. per what the needs are in the firm. If you're a smaller firm, you want to measure certain things. If you're a larger firm, you want to measure different things and think about the impact of those things for your clients, for the work that you're doing. But impact metrics to me are more important than overall metrics and percentages. Like, what does your decision-making process mean to a certain community and a certain identity? I know when we were strategizing in this panel and we were meeting each other, I mentioned that, for example, Glassdoor for large organizations is now going to sort their reviews per race and gender and identity. And the reason they're doing that is because they want a future employee to know what it means to be, and they quote, Black female for that firm. So that is at a larger scale, things that are happening at the IBM and the AT&Ts and the Walmarts of the world, because they have so many reviews and they can sort. But what does it mean for us to do that at the scale of a firm? If we look at those impact metrics, how does it impact the decisions that we make at a firm for a specific identity and a specific race or gender? And also look at the intersectionality of those things. It's not only being Black, it's not only being a woman, it's not only being LGBTQ. What does it mean to tackle all of those things together? And that intersectionality, is there a disproportionate impact for a particular group that exhibits all of these identities, and what does it mean for them to show up authentically in the workplace? So I think there are many ways to tackle the issue. And I think you just need to start where you are in the process as a firm, understand who your people are, what they need, and I would use the Guides for Equitable Practice as a starting point.
Well, that's some incredibly powerful guidance. Giselle, thank you for that. I think we're gonna wrap it up here. I want to thank you all so much. Reggie, I want to thank you for your leadership and joining with AIA DC to have this conversation. Our partnership with you and with the really important work that NOMA is doing is so critical to all of our success. We're really grateful for that. I want to also thank all of our panelists today for their time in preparing for this conversation and for the total transparency that you've shared with us on details that are sensitive and personal and incredibly meaningful to this conversation. Nobody on this panel and in this community of architects who've dialed in today are interested in continuing with business as usual. So let's get to making the change. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you.
Thank
Have
you
a
very much.
great day.